Most of what we're going to talk about is pretty straightforward. There's no great mystery to lighting. There's hardly any mystery to life, actually, after you've done a lot of lighting, because it's got a lot of common sense in it. Lighting started in caves, funnily enough. These are cave paintings, 30,000 years old, and there was lighting involved. They'd pitch black, these caves, but they had candles. These paintings were most probably, by the flame moving, became animated. Instead of looking at them from electric light nowadays, you should look at it really from extension of lighting in caves would be shadow puppets. 3,000 years ago, people were making really intricate filigree hand puppets. They still go on nowadays in India and rural places in China. They tend to be morality plays or an education, but it's also very entertaining. All that would be a stretched skin and little puppets on sticks and a narration from behind. They're very, very simple. They draw in and out of focus. It's all up against the screen. You still use this technique. I've seen this in theatre. And this is where it changed. This is my short version of history of lighting. Inigo Jones was an English architect. He changed everything. He designed the proscenium arch. Prior to that, all theatre was on open platforms in the round. The Greeks built amphitheatres, and that's pretty much how it stayed for 2,000 years. He came along, built the proscenium arch, and immediately the art of illusion came about. Looking at things through a slot, you control the entire environment. You can hide things left, right, up and down, but looking through the slot is how you can really create an illusion. And let's be realistic, we are trying to create illusions. The proscenium arch is definitely the way to do it. I've worked for illusionists, and they can never do anything without a proscenium. There's too much. They need you to look from a specific point of view, nothing around the side. Otherwise, you'll see the gag. And then for 250 more years, nothing, until this came along. This is the limelight. Follow spots are still called limes, and this is how it was worked. It was made with hydrogen oxygen. This is pre-electricity. By mixing hydrogen and oxygen and making a really hot flame and blasting it at a rod of quicklime, which is calcium oxide, the calcium actually turns out to be a temperature of 4,662 degrees Fahrenheit. That's just about the point where it'll start to melt. But when it's at that temperature, it produces light, in the sense that there's the incandescent light, which is the light that radiates from anything that has light in it, like a light bulb radiates. It's hot metal, basically. This then also produces a candoluminescence, which is very, very bright. It's the actual material that is generating light itself. And that was the original limelight. It was then put into a nice big copper box. You can see here I've got one of these. You can see here the little nozzles for the gas fuel. There's a chimney, and there would be some kind of Venetian blind in the front. And a long handle, because this thing is red hot. So the man would hold, most probably a man in those days. As I say, this is all pre-electricity. They tried with the same thing with acetylene, but that was not successful. And eventually electricity did come along, and they had these rather elaborate, very large lighting systems. You can see this chap here is the controller, and here is the origin of dance light. You might have noticed in ballet, the lighting always seems to be in the wings, tormentors. They're called tormentors because they torment the ballerinas as they fly off stage. They didn't really have much rigging. This is a very large box, most probably with a lime in itself, not so much a lime spotlight, but just a lime floodlight. And it was just built onto a great big ladder. You had to get to it frequently to change the plug of lime. Nothing really changed there either. So that was the beginning of theatre and electricity, the beginning of electricity. The rotary dimmer, which lasted right into the middle of the last century. I used them in the 60s. And there's nothing really to it. It's just a lot of wound coil. Here's an interlocker. There was a moment in the Victorian times when they used gas, and they had an interlocking system of faders like this, and they would the interlocking is where you can actually group them together. These would be 4 channels, and then you could crossfade from that group of 4 to that group of 4, changing, just basically opening and closing valves. When they went to electricity, all they did was put the rotary rheostat or the dimmer behind it. And you sometimes see those in old theaters. And then in about the 40s, they kind of came up with this. This is a straight variable rheostat. There's a blackout switch, and there are 4 dimmers here with 2 lamps each. They're worth about 1,000 watts each. The important piece is the wood. That's the blackout stick, so you can move all 4 at a time because you've got 4 levers in this space. Anyway, when I started my psychedelic light shows, this is what we used. So it's quite recent. In the 30s, they developed these really elaborate things called color organs. They do look like a Wurlitzer, and they played light. In the 50s, people came up with more compact 2-scene preset and portable dimmer packs. They lasted well into the 70s. But all along, the most expensive piece of equipment was the follow spot. It's only recently that the follow spot has become, well, it's still a big piece of equipment. It's still incredibly important, but some of the new technology has overtaken it in price. They're quite complicated. This is all wire. These are levers back here, and they would pull and draw up the colors in this little box. There's a color wheel. Here's where you had your framing, and here you could put in glass effects. Quite complicated, and the design hasn't really changed much at all. Then we came along in 1914, this kind of light appeared, a spotlight. Everybody always pursued the spotlight. For years, the spot was all what it was containing light to a specific place. And then nothing's really changed with these. All that's happened is the lenses got longer, the bulbs got brighter, but the principle's still the same, 2 lenses. The same with the Fresnel. That turned up in about 1930s. And originally the Fresnel lens and the limelight were developed for lighthouses. So you can thank the shipping industry for most of our achievements. The Fresnel lens, invented by a man called Fresnel, a simple bulb that moves backwards and forwards, produces a nice wash light. And again, the contest was on for making it bigger, making it brighter, but exactly the same principle. One of the worst lights ever designed was that. It's beam light. And then all the effects projectors. This piece of equipment was actually developed in the 30s for a particular production. The Flying Scotsman, the Flying Dutchman is the production of the Scottish Opera. 1981, this little thing came along. This is a picture of the very first Vari-Light. And since then, everything changed. It's a moving light. It's the forefather of all of the equipment we're going to see later. There's a lot of skill went with this. Before this, there was stagecraft, and since then, it's all become technology and computers. We'll talk about the old tricks as well, because they're still very pliable, and they're very affordable as well. And there it is. The granddaddy of follow spots is the 2K xenon. And that's still used. It's still a prime source of illuminating your principal artists. And it all started with that little copper tin box. Nothing's changed in the reflector department. This is a parabolic reflector. PAR light, is actually parabolic aluminized reflector. And that's the shape of it. And what it does is it gathers the light into pretty much a close parallel beam. You'll always get a bit of halation from the edge, which is why we have a tube, a snoot, to capture that spill light that we're really not very interested in. This is the ordinary curve reflector. This actually has because it's a simple curve, you do get light crossing over. Again, you can contain it in a tube. But this is basically the diagram that describes a flooding light or a Fresnel light. And the most complicated reflectors is the ellipsoidal. As you can see, that gathers everything to that little point there. That's the focal point. That's where your shutters are, the framing shutters to frame off your picture, to shutter out unwanted light. It's also where you put your gobo patterns. And that's pretty much the light that we use in any spotlight, any profile light. And that has stayed the same for the last century or more. Got any questions? No? You like history? That was about as much history as I want. So let's discuss the way it works, dealing with clients. You all have clients, I assume? You all hope to have clients? The trick is hanging on to your clients, and you can lose them at any moment. So we're going to discuss concept to performance. Concept. Well, what is concept? This is how design breaks down. First of all, you have a meeting, and you're going to discuss our concept. Most people want to have their ideas interpreted and made possible. Then you go to a whole point of designing it, producing it, as in manufacturing, and budget. I put budget at the bottom. It should really be at the top. It really should read like this. Concept and budget. When you have an idea, that's when you spend the money. When you draw a line on your paper, that's when you spend the money. There are 2 points of a pencil. There's the expensive end, the sharp end, and the blunt end. The eraser is the cheap end. Always use the eraser. Every line you rub out is a saving. Budget, design is also a budget consideration. You can affect your design You can affect your design and budget by being frugal with equipment. You can use the right material, keep it lightweight. That saves a lot of fuel costs. I mean, your budget goes right through to the touring. Production is real straightforward. It's just the manufacturing of raw materials or made goods. And daily touring costs, you'll come across that because halfway through doing your design, a production manager will show up and he'll start saying, well, you know, we're not going to get that through that door. He's being practical. Or that's going to cost a lot of money, or that's going to take a lot of crew to move, and these are all expenses. Everything he says is an expense. So try and keep it thin and light. Larger than life, thinner than paper. That's a good motto to keep in mind. So this is really the trick. Concept. It's nothing but an abstract idea or a general notion. The general notion is 9 times out of 10 what your client is going to say, I want. I want my spaceship to crash on the stage and we appear. The answer to that is, I can make your spaceship appear to crash on stage. You don't build the whole spaceship. I'll show you this as an example later on. The general notion is, a good designer is going to take any general notion and turn it into an abstract. I'll give you a pantomime example. The client requires a giant red dog, a huge red dog, and this is pantomime. Instead of building a giant red dog, which takes a lot of machinery to move on stage and now fills the whole stage up, you just have a big leg and it just moves on stage and drops in, and that's it. Everybody, there's the big leg. The actors look that way, and the audience, using their imagination, a free tool for you to use your will. The imagination says, there's a big dog. It's so big, I can only see its leg. Audio, woof, woof, and everybody always looks there. And that's it. That's a simple illusion. You can fool all the people all the time, especially an audience, because they want to be fooled. They're not there to, well, there's always one technocrat who's going to, oh, I can see how that was done. But most people are actually self-deluding. They want to believe the whole fantasy. Pantomime is a great example of that. It really is a great example because you can see the wires that Peter Pan flies on, but nobody sees the wires because they don't want to see the wires, so they edit it themselves. So you can always do well keeping those in mind as to how you're going to do things. Don't try and create literally what people want. Otherwise, you'll be building the Great Wall of China. Instead of making the Great Wall of China out of styrofoam, that's a good way of doing it. But it's the materials, it's just got to look believable. And with the imagination of the audience, it's always believable. So design, the definition of design is a plan, a drawing, to produce, to show. The show is very important. I tend to use renderings, hand drawings, cartoons, sketches. Doesn't matter how good a drawer you are, practice drawing. It's a great way. It's the best way, actually, of selling yourself. You're never selling a product. When you're approaching a design, you're selling yourself. Because in reality, you're selling something that the people who are paying good money for will never really see, apart from the managers. They have an opinion, but they're not the people you're trying to impress. Usually the people you're trying to impress are the producers, if you're in theatre, Or the actual, in the music business, it's always the person on stage. They never see what you're doing. They feel it, they hear about it, and lately they get to see it on YouTube. We'll go into that one later. Yeah, YouTube is a good friend, is a terrible enemy. So, in a way, the design comes in layers. You'll start showing and proving the design to your client. That's sketches, cartoons. You don't really show them technical drawings. Later technical drawings will come along to produce the production end. When we get to drawings, never ever let, and this is really sound advice, never let anybody construct from your drawings. Make them draw their own drawings. Otherwise your liability is just number one. If you have something that breaks and it was drawn from your drawing, you're liable. Always make a construction company redraw. Even if they just redraw, but they've got to put their name on it, they've got to take ownership of the design. You're just the designer, they're the constructor, they own the responsibility, not you. So one thing you can put across all your drawings is do not construct from this drawing, and put it right across the whole thing, like a watermark. I can't labor that point any greater. That is really, really important. Otherwise you'll be doing something else for your career. Okay, production's straightforward again. It's just making things from components or raw materials. It's cheaper to use components because they're ready-made, and raw materials, well, the raw material the most raw material for me would be either just bolts of fabric or lengths of aluminum tube. If you're in theatre, planks of wood. And budget. The budget. This is here we are wanting to be designers and we end up being accountants. Most people seem to think a budget is about restriction. You should try and understand how a budget really works. Your client's going to say, don't spend more than this. That's your budget. Try and argue the point up. Sometimes they're just ridiculous. They want the world, but they only want to pay for a small country. Understand this part here. Income. How much do you think they're going to make? That's easy enough. Work out how many seats they're going to sell, how much do the seats cost. Then you have to try and work out all the other things that you should know about anyway. Cost of trucking, cost of crew, rental equipment, liability, insurance. All of those things are expenditures. But if you understand an idea, a notion of how much they're earning, you might be able to put a valid argument to your accountant that you're not paying enough to the production to have things made. The last thing an accountant really wants is for you to go back to the person with the original idea, the concept, and say, well, it's a great idea, but you can't afford it. That just doesn't work. So you do have a little bit of strength there. This is the business side, negotiating a budget, and it is a negotiable point. Don't just accept what they tell you. Because most people, they're very conservative about spending money. You want them to be a little bit more liberal. In the long run, it'll serve you better if you spend a bit more money at the beginning than trying to modify things along the way. So that's pretty much how it works. Tour cost, talk to your production manager. If he's clever, he'll have lots of good tricks up his sleeve of how to deploy equipment quickly. I might want to make all my equipment break down into nice, manageable one-man components, and he'll say, no, leave it the full size of the truck. Now it's just one big piece, 4 people carry in, or use, well, if you keep it light and then people can carry it. If it gets heavy, now you're going to involve a forklift. Forklift's another person, another specialist skill. Oh, excuse me. Anyway, touring costs is a thing that you'll get advised on. You can't really control much of that except by making your design manageable, and that's where your production manager is going to come and say. Stage managers also have a say because they might have to move it quickly during the show. So there it is. That's how it works. It's really straightforward. Concept's really where you try and grasp somebody's idea, turn it into an abstraction. Also where you spend the money, and design is where you can polish the design. You can polish the result, lessen the cost, hopefully. Production, choose your company as well. I try to do my designs with a production company, with a manufacturer in mind, because everybody has different skills. Everybody has different techniques. Some companies are good for some types of scenery, other types. Some companies are great on aluminum, for example. And they're really basically good welders, and they have all good tricks on that, keeping it light, making it strong by clever design as opposed to just brute force by adding more material. Some other production companies are much better at theatrical type designs, carving, sculpting. We'll go through. I've got 3 really good examples of how a production is built. And I've forgotten what's coming next. That. So any questions on that? How would you go about? Anybody here who makes things? Do you build things? Do you have people build them for you? No, you just come to lectures. Okay. Next. This is a good way of, we're still in the design stage, storyboards. You can do these on napkins, the proverbial napkin design. I've seen quite a few good ones actually. But the storyboard is a way of expressing your understanding of the original I want, the concept. And a storyboard is quite a simple thing. It's used in the film industry a lot for art directors to explain to cameramen, to directors of photography. Literally, they draw arrows all the way through. Anyway, this is a story, and I hope it's amusing. This is a story about ELO. ELO is this particular band from the 70s. They're still about, actually. Not ELO, the touchscreen, but ELO, the band. In particular, this guy here, Jeff Lynne, very clever guy. And he has this thing about spaceships. This is his idea, and this is what you have to deal with. This is the general notion. In the beginning, the stage is completely empty, and there's just this gobo on the floor that says ELO. Well, that's completely naff from the designer's point of view, because 1/3 of the audience can't see the stage floor. They're sitting down on the ice, and it's pretty boring. It's going to sit there for an hour and a half. His second idea is, and then New York City skyline appears, and Central Park, that's represented by the bushes. And then my big spaceship comes down and crash lands, and then we all come over the top in a blaze of light. He's being very specific here, which is kind of really categorizes him in the general thing. I like the idea of the light. I didn't like anything else until this moment. It all opens up, and then we play for 3 hours, and it takes off. The end, another gobo. That's it. He's worked out the beginning and a rather feeble end, and 3 hours of music in between. He's a musician. So, no slight on musicians. They just seem to think that they know it all. So we get rid of the gobo. That's really got to go. The Central Park thing, that's easy. That's actually a rental backdrop. Got pencils and paper? I'm going to give you some hints. I'd rent that backdrop from JC Backing here in Los Angeles. It's 108 foot wide. It's 36 foot high. It was made in 1952. It's got a resume as long as mine. It really is an impressive piece of material. It's all on muslin. It's painted on the front of city buildings, and it can be backlit. The windows aren't painted at all, so the muslin just lights up. It's really clever. And it's reusable. I've used it maybe 4 or 5 times in my experiences, and it's just perfect. And you can do daylight scenes, nighttime. You can just do endless amounts of lighting tricks on it. Where did I get to? I've lost my count here. So the point of the storyboard was to show him that I understood what he wanted to do. There's nothing much more to it. The thing of the coming down, the whole stage, it's quite a piece of machinery actually. You can do it. Yeah, it's weigh about 8 tons, and you could do it on 8 one-ton motors. That's a bit of a management deal, but you've got all your equipment in the air, and it's going to come down and land on an empty platform. The real way of doing that would be use opera net, which is a very fine gauze. It's like very fine fishing net actually. And on that you'd stitch, in this modern day, lots of little LEDs, and you'd have some pipes going in there for smoke and the haze and all the effects that you want your spaceship to come down. It's total darkness. So your best friend is total darkness. It comes down, it's flashing, audio is playing rather loud spaceship noises, and it just comes down. It's just maybe weighs about 100 pounds, and it just comes down on a simple windshaw line. It gets to the bottom, Now what's happened is everybody starts looking at this great big spectacle coming down nice and slowly, and it's got a little bit of a wobble. It looks like the shape of a spaceship. What's happening under the stage is that's most probably opened up, or some panels of the real spaceship has now risen up. The hardware is always on the floor. It comes up, the net comes down, big explosion. In that moment of flash and a momentary darkness after the gag has gone north, it's just gone out of sight. The next is the reveal of lighting comes up, and there's your spaceship. You thought it came down. That's the trick of the illusion. That's turning things into an abstract. Oh, forget about the end. Really, it's doing it all in reverse. That's going to have to be really thought about. So you take the liberty of forgetting about the end. After 3 hours of music, everyone wants to go home anyway. That's easy. Here's the stage that's come up through the stage, coming over, that's easy. You can now say, I understand the whole thing. Have I got it right? He'll agree. You go on to more things. These are just proofs. These are actually the real photographs of that backdrop I described. jcbacking.com. And they have endless amounts of backings, actually. You can get a bank building. You can get park features, countryside, more buildings, lots of far-off things. And nowadays with digital printing, there's a lot of photographic backdrops as well. Digital printing changed everything. So this is their album cover. This is it. Here's the park. Yeah, I like the park. This is great. All the scenery of the city. He's enjoying all this. So okay, now I know what he wants, and he knows what I'm going to do, and I'll start drawing things up. Just ordinary sketches. This is incomplete. It's got blue line on it. The trick with blue line is you photocopy it and the blue line doesn't appear. Use a black and white copier or set your copier to black and white. The blue line doesn't appear. So it's like an instant eraser. So you can do all sorts of sketching and you come out with the idea. It's kind of based on, I know, their album cover really. The next thing is I've already chosen my manufacturer. They need a console behind the big Star Trek console. Of course, we turn it into something that musicians would understand, so it's more like a boombox with little graphic equalizers and keyboards and levers. That was kind of okay. That was their original sketch. Then they moved forwards to this. This is their work. You see how that's there? They're taking responsibility for this. Although if it really looks naff, at the end of the day, you still carry the bucket, you know. You got them to do it. You're still responsible for that, at least. So here we have the big bass clef, which they used to start the show, and it just looks like a big old mixing thing, but that's actually quite big. So I finally come back to him with my ultimate finished rendering, which took about 3 days. And he said, well, I don't know. I don't know about the bushes. Maybe we shouldn't do it in Central Park. Oh dear. And the backdrop, that's going to be really there all the time? Yeah. Oh, I'm not sure about that. The stage looks good, but we want to be up on it. Oh, yeah, he liked all of the machinery. He liked the screenery, but he's kind of really gone off his own idea. Of course, he never admits that. So I said, well, I've got an idea. It's a bit like this. Well, he didn't want this, and he didn't want this. He wanted something much more industrial. So I had this idea of curves, and here's my idea of a spaceship. It starts on the deck, and it turns into something like this. And this is actually it working. This is at PBS television studios here in Los Angeles. Possibly the most expensive place to put a production together. We were in there for 2 weeks, 24 hours a day with a union call, 24 hours a day. Yeah. Anyway, there he is, Jeff, and his fabulous thing. And there, above the whole thing is a mother grid, which actually was just to get the chain motors that operated all that into place. And that is simple rental curve truss. That's a great saving. Rent it, don't own it. If you own it, you've got to store it, you've got to insure it, you've got to maintain it. And it's not their business, they're musicians. They don't need to be in the storage and rental business. So this is just standard rental equipment from a lighting company. The shape was determined by the rental company's shape, the radius of that. These are simple aluminum frames with fabric stretched over it and attached to the frame by Velcro. That way you can actually re-stretch it. You can take it off if it gets damaged and stitch it, or even send it to the laundry. And I can't remember what the material was. It wasn't It was some kind of synthetic polyester, I think, which is inherently fireproof. Those are all things you have to think about. Materials always need to be qualified. Can I use this? Will it work on the road? Is it fire retardant? Where are we going? Here in California, there's a very exciting gentleman. His name's Mr. Fisher, Inspector Fisher. You might have come across him. He's actually the man in charge of public safety, and he really can just say, no, that's it, not that piece of equipment, don't like that material. If you haven't got an Article 19 of the Californian Health and Public Safety Code, you won't get your equipment into any theater in California. Mr. Fisher's my benchmark. If I can please him, I can take my gear anyway. You can proof it, you can have it flame-proofed, but you have to, if for California, you have to have it done by a company that will issue Article 19. The rest of the country, you can get away with a 701, which is usually supplied with the base material. If you go to New England, they want a burn sample. They want to test it themselves. So when you get your material made, also get your material made with a few strips extra. Digital printing, these are all good words of caution. Digital printing is very, very available nowadays and a great way of doing backdrops. Any kind of scenery, you can print it on any kind of material really, even on speaker fronts. The material that most people use is a polyester, inherently flame-proof. Caution, the ink isn't. And if you use cheap 6-color printing, that'll become very thick on the material. Quite often it doubles the weight. That is a flame hazard, and you'll have to proof it, and even then, sometimes ink overpowers the proofing. If you're going to do digital printing, go to real high resolution. Companies that use 15 colors, 3 blacks, 2 whites, they'll put on very, very, very thin layers of ink, and that has a better chance of passing muster. Use heavier material, not the very lightweight polyesters. Use the heavier material. You're trying to basically create a balance of non-flammable and flammable. This is what a field test is. You take your material, a strip of material, they'll hold it in a pair of kitchen tongs. They'll take an ordinary stick lighter and they'll put an inch long flame at the bottom of the material and hold it there for 12 seconds. And then they take the flame away. And in 3 seconds, if it hasn't gone out, it hasn't passed the test and it's condemned. That is serious, and I've seen the whole thing, woof. The printing thing is really important. That's a new problem, and a lot of people have been sending blank samples of materials, getting the okay, and then turning up with heavyweight print on non-flammable material. Flammable material on non-flammable material doesn't work. So anyway, that's how we built that thing. A couple of the old shots from rehearsals. I thought that was quite elegant, actually. It worked rather well. And it was really quite affordable because it was rental and these very simple panels of aluminum. My big point of lighting is an object to illuminate. It doesn't work if you don't have an object. It doesn't work, and smoke's an object. A lot of people put haze in the air because they want to see the beams. They're lighting an object. It's little particles of water. I kind of like rather large canvases. And there, okay. Someone's going to ask me a question about safety, aren't they? No, he keeps putting his hand up. He's a cameraman. Nope, okay, next.